ain't a podcast that's flyer. You are now tuned in to Direct Misfire. Bensome, Huw, and Sellick. Tell everyone to tune in. Let's roll the dice. Let me show you what we doing. A fantasy war game. Play it smart and you win. What you know about the crystal pen and the retribution? Hero, giants and knights galore. It's an adventure. This is Kings of War. Let's go.
Hulking, massively muscled creatures, ogres are twice the height of a man and many times his weight. Young ogres have left home for years of adventure since time immemorial, only returning to their tribes to start a family. The life of a mercenary comes naturally to them. As each ogre is a survivor of a brutal childhood in the frozen north, they are natural warriors, used to hunting giant beasts and defending their family group from all manner of threats. Once recruited by an ogre captain at the yearly ogre thing, an ogre brave will be given more advanced weapons training and taught battle drills, turning an already formidable fighter into a deadly, monstrous soldier.
Hello champs, and welcome once again to another Direct Misfire Army review. Joining me as always is Sellick.
Hey.
And Huw.
Howdy.
As we analyse and assess the Ogre Army list. So pull up a seat, grab a drink, and let's get into it. Okay, the Ogres, it's been a while since our last review.
Yeah, well, some people are pretty keen to hear more about the Ogres, I guess.
And they've also increased in power since the last Clash of Kings update. So there's a few good juicy changes in there at the moment.
Yeah, definitely one of the topper half of the armies in the power rankings, I would say. I think we have actually done a review on the Ogres many moons ago with Spoon and yourself.
Yes, I think it was one of the first, because it was one of the armies that I used to play regularly.
Yeah, I always thought of them previously as probably a middle of the road army, but like maybe it like toward the lower end of the middle of the road, like the bottom half, but the top of the bottom half, if that makes sense. But I feel like they've got a few power buffs recently, and I wonder if they've lifted up a little bit. Awesome.
Okay, so let's start off with the upgrade that the Ogres get. So a lot of the units have the option to take a Crocodog. So this is a cheap little upgrade, and basically once per game, when you're rolling to hit in combat, you can choose to reroll up to 3 of the dice that score a natural unmodified 1. So it's sort of like Elite, but up to a maximum of 3 dice.
Which isn't that bad, considering you've got a lot of units that are hitting on 3s.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they feel like not the best value for points for me. Like I feel like there's nothing wrong with chucking 5 points into them if you sort of have a few points left at the end of your army, but I wouldn't build around them or put them on every unit or anything like that. That's my hunch, anyway.
Especially when there's a Blade of Slashing about. Like, I think that's just a better item for 5 points.
Yeah, and even the Staying Stone, I think, works really well, particularly on some Siege Breakers that we'll get to as well. Making those go up to 16, 17 on the Horde is pretty fantastic.
Alright, well, let's start off with the rubbish of the army list. So we'll start off with the Red Goblin. So basically there's a goblin, so the Red Goblin Rabble, speed 5, melee 5, no ranged, defense 4. Come in 3 sizes, Regiment, Horde, and Legion. And just the usual suspects in terms of unit strength, 2, 3, 4, 12, 25, 30 attacks on those different 3. 12, 14 nerve, 19, 21 on the Horde, and 25, 27 for the Legion, for 75, 125, and 180 points respectively. And no additional special rules for these guys, so just the keyword Goblin. Very bog standard goblins, which you rarely see in an ogre list.
How do they differ, Bensome, between them and green goblins, apart from the colour?
They don't, other than the name Red in the title and the keyword. Just because, I guess in the lore, they're called red goblins because they wear red to differentiate themselves from others, so they don't get accidentally hit by their own dudes.
Yeah, and obviously the green goblins, if we're going to call them that, unlock as well. These are irregular.
Yes, yep.
Oh, right, they're regular. No wonder you never see them. Okay, yeah, I missed that. That's kind of obvious now that you say that, but...
I have actually seen these guys only used in the regiments.
Yeah, a bit of extra unit strength for a pretty low price. Sure, why not? 75 points. for a unit strength 2 regiment with 12-14 nerve. That's exactly the same as a Ratkin warrior regiment, which I take for a bit of unit strength sometimes, except Ratkins are 10 points more, but then they've got an extra speed, which I think is pretty useful. So, yeah, I don't see why not taking a couple of regiments for just claiming things, but I feel like ogres don't really lack in the little unit strength department, if only because of all their unit strength 1 characters and stuff.
Yeah,
So
totally agree.
without the unlocks, I'm not sure I see much of a use for these guys.
Yeah. So we'll jump into their Sharpstick brothers. So they're Red Goblin Sharpsticks, also a regular. Exactly the same stats there, so speed 5, melee 5, no range with defense 4. They come in all 3 flavors as well, the regiment, the horde, and the legion. Exactly the same unit strength, 2, 3, 4. They do go up, as do most spear units in attacks, to 15, 30, and 35. And the nerve, 12, 14, 19, 21, 25, 27. And the points go up as well, as you'd expect, 95, 155, and 230. These guys here do get the phalanx special rule because of their sharp sticks. It falls into the same sort of bucket, I think, as the rabble.
Yep.
Maybe you want a horde to guard a flank. They do something that other ogre units don't do that well.
At 155 points, you can get a useful ogre unit to do that.
I guess so, but I mean, they can hold back a cavalry horde or a couple of cavalry hordes perhaps a little bit better than most ogre units can. Ogres might suffer from, a lot of units that that hit really hard and have a lot of speed because the ogres are just, mostly movement 6. So maybe there's a use for a phalanx unit, but I don't know. Kind of stretching. I probably agree with you, but I think I wouldn't write them off immediately. That's all.
I mean, yeah, it's not a bad choice. It's hard to fit into an ogre list.
Yeah. And I think they've spoilt for choice just with that, for that point cost, like what you get in other units. I think, you can spend 230 points very well in this list.
True. Next up is Red Goblin Spitters, which are the shooty version. They're speed 5, melee 6, range 5, defense 3. So you go down into defense for the range, which is pretty much how these units usually work. So 24-inch bows, regiment or horde, unit strength 2 and 3 respectively. 10 attacks, 12, 14, and 90 points on the regiment. 20 attacks, 19, 21, and 160 points on the horde. So if you want a little bit of shooting... Look, if you're taking a irregular unit that just sort of is going to sit around and gain you a bit of unit strength, I don't see why you wouldn't go with one of the ones that can shoot rather than the ones that can't. I mean, sometimes in similar equivalents in other armies, you wouldn't go for the shooter unit because it's irregular, but in this case they all are these little gobbos, so maybe just take the shooty ones to sit on a point.
Absolutely terrible in combat as well, so that's all they're doing, sitting there, and if something charges them, then well, they're dead.
Yeah, that's pretty true of the regular rabble too, though.
Yeah, but rabble have a bit more defense, and occasionally you can punch back. Like with playing goblins, melee 5, I have gotten lucky rolling 5s and 6s, but it's not going to happen with just 6s.
You just don't see them, and there's a pretty good reason why.
Yeah, I think maybe one of the reasons why could also be that ogres tend to be more of the aggressive approach the opponent and get stuck into them kind of list, as opposed to the sort of sit back and shoot list. And so there's less motivation to just take some poxy bow units, which you might add to a gunline list or something with a lot of shooting.
I also find with these kinds of units, if you have it on the flank, it makes it a lot easier for your opponent to charge it, smash it, and then reform and look at your flank. If they have a big flying gribbly, which usually isn't nimble, it can do that now because you've got a small cheap thing that's supposed to be holding unit strength, but now it's dead, and now you've got this angry monster looking at your flank because of the combat reform.
Yeah, in the regiment size, for sure.
Yeah. Alright, well, let's move on to the mounted version. So the Red Goblin Scout, speed 10, melee 4, no range, defense 4, troop and regiments only, unit strength 1 on the troop, 3 on the regiment, 7 attacks for the troop, 14 for the regiment, 10, 12 nerve, and 13, 15 at 100 points and 155. Now these are nice and quick with nimble, thunderous charge, and vicious in melee only. Great in the goblin list, might be okay for something nice and quick in the ogre list as the regiment, or fast chaff as well, I guess, in the troop, but they don't come up as often.
Yeah, so I think they've started to come back into favour a little bit, just as that fast chaff in the troop size.
I think it depends
Okay.
what else you've got for chaff, but I think they're a perfectly valid chaff option.
Yeah, I think another big worry with the scouts is that they can be wavered. So if you run out there and then they waver, you can't really get them out efficiently. So it stalls your army line.
Yeah, definitely can. Yeah, you start to block yourself up.
Yeah, and that's not what you need as ogres.
So the shooty version of the Goblin Scouts are also irregular, and they're called Sniffs. So Red Goblin Scout Sniffs. They're also speed 10, they're melee 4, they're range 5, with a 3 defense, so 1 lower than the other scouts. They only come in a troops though, with unit strength 1, 7 attacks, 9-11 nerve at 105 points, so 5 more points than the troops. And they come with nimble, also vicious in melee, even though they don't get thunderous, that's right. So nimble and just vicious in melee with steady aim on their short bows, so 18-inch range. Not a bad option as well. For 5 extra points, you get some shots in.
If I was going to go Goblin Chaff, this is what I would take, just because they're more like shooty gargoyles without regen. That lower nerve means that if they do get charged because they're trying to stall, then they're more likely to die than waver.
Yeah, and 1 less defense as well, so they will actually take wounds more efficiently.
Which is what I want as a chaff unit.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's not often you get to call a lower defense an advantage, but
This is the way you got to think, Huw.
yeah, I like it.
I think we're all in agreement we're not staking items on any of these units.
Yeah.
Oh, certainly not.
All right, so let's move on to the meaty boys. How about you take us away with the chariots?
So the warrior chariots are speed 8, melee 3, range nothing, and defense 5. So that's pretty nice already, having a melee 3 and defense 5 and a rare speed 8 unit in this army. So they come in troop, regiment, horde, or legion. So in the troop, 10 attacks, 13, 15 nerve, 170 points. To go up to 215 points, you get 15, 17 nerve, and 15 attacks. To go to 270 points, which is the horde, you get 17, 19 nerve, and 20 attacks. And then for the legion, 310 points gets you 20, 22 nerve, and 25 attacks. You go up 1 unit strength each time, and 5 attacks each time. And you also go up 2 nerve each time, with the exception of the legion, which grabs 3 cheeky nerve instead of 2. So pretty sensible progression there, up in both points and each. Just take them in whatever size you want, basically. They're quite a flexible unit in that sense.
Legions are huge, though.
As soon as you go up into the horde or the legion side, you have to bolt in Strider.
Yeah, well, it's sort of 45 points to go from troop to regiment, but then going from horde to legion is only 40 points. You can see they've made a few little adjustments there. You also get 1 extra nerve in the legion. So it's more efficient to be a legion, but then the base size is such that it's super duper unwieldy, obviously. Yeah, they have brutal, crush 1 and thunderous charge 2. So yeah, very, very hitty unit and fast for the ogres. Being able to have, I would include at least 1 unit of these in my ogre army, I think, most of the time, by virtue of the fact that otherwise you can get in this trap where you got all these ogre hordes and stuff. You have heaps of movement 6, which is fine, except I know from playing Ratkin Army where they're all movement 6, it's really helpful to have at least 1 or 2 units that can reach out that little bit further.
What size would you be taking?
I don't know, actually. That's a good question. Depends on the tools for the job, right? I'm thinking like a couple of regiments look quite attractive.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would take any, to be honest.
Nimble troop would be fun.
Don't know. I've never played with the chariots at all, or played against them.
Yeah, I'm not sure why they're not more popular. They seem like a pretty solidly costed unit for me. I mean, I guess they're quite expensive for the nerve, but you expect that when you're defense 5 and melee 3 and speed 8. Like, melee 3 is nuts.
They're also reasonable shielders as well because they're height 4 and defense 5 with some reasonable nerve.
Yep, see over hills as well, which is always handy. Any items that you would be looking at?
Just Strider.
Yeah. Strider, Pathfinder.
Or Strider.
Just the same things you put on every single cavalry unit in the history of the world, basically. Especially since they're Thunder 2. You don't want to be losing that. Don't want to be going to melee 4. You want them to be hitting reliably, because Their attacks are very high quality, but unless you're going like Legion size, it's not necessarily a huge number of them, so you don't want them suffering from being hindered. And they're so bulky footprint-wise that there's the hindrance is just so likely. I don't think there's really...
Extra speed may be okay as well on the smaller unit, like on a regiment or troop. Alright, well let's move on to the ranged version. So we've got Boomer Chariots, so speed 8, melee 4, range 4, defense 4. Troops and regiments only, no hordes or legions. Unit strength 1 and 2, 8 attacks for the troops, 12 for the regiment, 11-13 nerve on the troop, and 13-15 on the regiment, at 145 and 180 points. Now, these guys strangely have Aura Stealthy, which is a bit of a out there rule for these guys. They're also brutal, crushing strength 1, and carry boomsticks, so range 12, piercing 1, steady aim. Weapons, I don't know about these guys. I feel like they're supposed to be like more nimble boomers, but the damage output isn't as good, the nerve isn't as good, and they're still quite expensive. I don't know how these guys should be used.
Yeah, I'm totally in agreement with you, Bensome. You have a look at the points, you have a look at the damage output, and nothing adds up. So, like, I mean, I've never seen these units either.
Defense 4, I mean, that's so expensive for Defense 4. Low nerve for the rest of the ogres, like 11-13.
Yeah, they're going to be a target
points.
too, because they can shoot like reasonably well. So, and admittedly only at 12 inches. Yeah, this unit is a bit of a potato, I reckon.
Harder to hide because of height 4.
Like, I'd be targeting it. I'd be taking it off, for sure.
Hell yeah. The damage output, though, isn't that much of a threat. It's something that you could probably leave for a little while. Even in the regiment form, 180 points for 12 attacks, hitting on 4s.
Yeah, it reminds me, effectiveness-wise, of those little war machines that are like breath attack kind of war machines. You know, there's quite a few of them in different lists. And they just seem better than this, to be honest, because they're way cheaper. And not hugely harder to kill, like definitely harder, but perhaps not enough for it to matter too much. And they're more able to get in gaps and get those shots off, because 12 inches is not too far to shoot.
Yeah.
I think that's a big point there, the size.
Yeah, that is a really good point. This is just going to get in the way. This is a hard no for me. Probably the first hard no. I think there's plausible you could use some of the other units, but this Boomer Chariots, irregular, it's just got nothing going for it.
No, pass.
Yeah, write in with your stories of kicking ass with Boomer Chariots. Boomers,
if you have any.
If you have any.
Let us know.
Please. Love to hear.
But what does stack up, for me anyway, is the first of the large infantry units, and that's the Boomers. So these guys come at speed 6, melee 4, range 4, defense 4, only come in regiments and hordes. Unit strength is 2 and 3 respectively. Attacks 9 and 18, and the nerve 12-14, 15-17, and points 140 and 230. Now these guys come with a couple of special rules. Brutal, which is pretty much across the board for all ogres, and crushing strength 1, and their boomsticks are 12-inch piercing 1 steady aim little rocket things. These guys here are scary, purely because you can't fly over the ogre units, because these guys will just pivot on the spot, and with 18 attacks hitting on 4s at pierce 1, they are nasty.
They're the best flyer defense that the ogres have got, I think.
Yeah, and they need it too, because flyers are such a problem for ogres, especially like nasty, dragony kinds of flyers. So having an answer to them is important, I think. And it's not the only answer, but it's definitely one of the best ones. And if they don't have any flying dragons and stuff, you can just shoot anyone else too.
With the boomers, they're actually quite capable in combat as well. So at melee 4, 18 attacks with crush 1. They'll actually dish out a little bit of damage as well, just on the counter attacks.
Like a unit of trolls.
Just like a unit of trolls, apart from with big boomsticks.
Yeah, they're a shooting unit that you can't expose your flank to, because they'll rip you a new one if you do, so that's pretty good.
I think you're taking these in hordes, not regiments, and I'm thinking the Boomer Chariot is probably a good example. If you take a regiment, just take a troop of chariots instead, because it's a easier footprint and you get extra speed, but there's not much in terms of points, attacks, or nerve between the two. So I would think you would want the extra speed.
Yeah, potentially. I just don't think if you're going to have a spare 140 points, you don't go boomers.
No. No. items, maybe fire oil, but that's it.
Yeah. I can't see anything else. I have seen them run with elite item.
Oh, yeah.
Just purely because it's elite on
Yeah,
both
that's
ranged
reasonable.
and melee.
Yeah,
But
still not a bad idea. But yeah, I'd probably just take them as is, I reckon.
Yeah, vanilla.
Nothing wrong with the staying stone either if you got a spare cheeky 5 points. Okay, cool. So then I guess after the boomers, you've got the shooters. So these guys are irregular. They've got speed 6 melee 4, range 5, defense 4. Regiments and hordes available. Regiment is unit strength 1, 9 attacks, 12, 14 nerve, and 140 points. The horde is unit strength 2, 18 attacks, 15, 17 nerve, and 230 points. So these guys have got brutal and crush 1, much like the boomers and other ogres, but they also have heavy crossbows, so 30-inch range at pierce 2, and pot shot.
Remember when shooters used to be the be-all and end-all?
Yeah, and then they
Yeah.
made them irregular, and then they fell out of fashion.
Yep, can't take them in as allies, and then they just dropped off.
People were taking 2 hordes of them, and then all of a sudden it's 36 attacks, pierce 2, and you couldn't counter them very easy because of that 30-inch range. And that's still the case, but they have fallen out of vogue a little bit as the shooting meta has gone away.
Yeah,
Which is good, I guess.
They're still pretty damn good. I mean, Night Stalker's going to eat him for brekkie, but against most other armies, that's some pretty devastating shooting. Because they're irregular, having 1 horde is great, but having 2 is so much better because they create enough fire between them to like threaten, cavalry units and anything that would attack them, basically. And if one of them fluffs the shot, the other one can hopefully deal with it. And both of them combined can take off a horde quite quickly, sometimes in a single volley with a decent volley. So having 2 is really nasty, but that's a lot of points to sink into. That's 460 at least to sink into irregular units when you need your unlocks. So I can see why people are taking them less. But if you had a single horde and they were combined with a bunch of other shooting, like you had some boomers or some other reliable, slightly longer range shooting, maybe even, heaven forbid, some goblin spitters or something, then I could still see 1 horde being really good.
Yeah. No, I think 1 horde, you've still got to deal with it. And as I've mentioned, that 30-inch range it's probably its biggest strength. Is it can sit back, it's got quite good unit strength. You've got to deal with it at some point, or else it will just chip wounds away all game.
Well, you should bloody hope so for 230 points.
But yeah, I think it'll chip away on everything. Is more the point. So defense 6, this will take it down to 4s.
Range 5, wounding on 4s. Yeah, maybe the good dwarf stuff don't really matter too much. Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to pass on these guys.
Passing on the shooters.
I think they're solid,
Yeah.
but I don't know that they'd make every list. In fact, I don't know that they'd make most lists of mine, but I think they're an interesting unit to take
I haven't seen
ogres
them
in a
ages.
different direction. Yeah.
How about we take a break here, and then, because we've been talking for a bit now, let the listeners get a bit of lore about the ogres, and then when we come back, we'll start talking about the meat and taters of the army. Alright, we'll do that. We'll be back soon.
Ogres are extremely strong, and so carry heavy swords and shields. His armor in the north is generally of tough hide, but once he joins the mercenary band, an ogre will spend his first few months' pay on proper armor of thick iron plates, all provided at a reasonable price, but he's captain of course. Some favor huge two-handed weapons they call orc cleavers, which, when brought down hard on the skull of an orc, generally tend to live up to their name. The veteran mercenaries of Mosfet's Iron Hammers use their trademark weapons to crush their foes' skulls, making sure they are well and truly dead.
Alrighty, as I was saying, the meat and potatoes, the big chonkies, that's going to make up the most of the army lists, the dudes on foot, and the most popular or basic choice, I guess, that you'll come across are the warriors. So these are large infantry size, speed 6, melee 3, no range, defense 5, regiment, horde, and legion sizes, unit strength 2, 3, 4, with 9, 18, and 36 attacks. For 12, 14 nerve, 15, 17 on the horde, and 22, 24 on the legion for 120 points on the regiment, 200 on the horde, 350 points on the Legion. They come with Brutal and Crushing Strength 1 as standard, and you get a couple of options. You can either drop their defense to 4, but up their Crushing Strength to 2 for free, and you can give them a crocodile as a little mascot. So, Warriors, the regiments now unlock, which is a big thing.
Yep.
Yeah, because the regiments are pretty
You
good.
used to have to take hordes of these guys, but yeah, now the regiments nerve 12-14, defense 5, roadblocks for 120 points.
Yeah, 9 attacks on 3s with Crush 1 is not bad damage output. Like, it's not great, but
And
it's
brutal.
It's okay for the points at only 120. Yeah, including brutal, good point. I think I'd probably keep the defense 5, and then they're, for 120 points, D5 roadblock, not too shabby.
Yeah, for sure. I really like these guys in the regiments.
Nothing wrong with a horde either as a damage dealer. Just give them... I'd probably take the 2-hand weapons at that point. I think it just
You
depends.
can't go wrong with a horde.
Yeah. Legion is crazy. It's just so expensive and so
wide as well.
so wide. Yeah, when you can fit 2 ogre hordes right next to each other, 2 different units, and they take up the same space as the Legion. Not sure why you would ever really go a
And
Legion.
you'd need Pathfinder on them as well.
Yeah.
Legion is technically more efficient points-wise. I mean, you don't really need Pathfinder, I don't think. 36 attacks on 3s. If they go down by...
On 4s.
Yeah, but so what? There's 36 of them. That's so many attacks. They should hopefully still go through whatever they're going through.
But it's also not just the neg 1, it's the now you can't at the double through terrain, which you're going to be hitting just about everything. So it's either walk 6 or charge. And they'll be so easy to block up as well because they're so wide. So chaff gets in the way super easy.
Yeah.
And they can be multi-charged so much easier as well.
Yep. Totally agree with everything Bensome's just said. If I saw a 350, which will have to have an item on it to make it valid, so let's just say 365 or so, I would just be throwing anything at it. And you just charge an individual over at it, do 1 wound on it, and buy another turn, and it will just stay there. So, yeah.
And like even if you just smash it in the front with a couple of units and then overrun, because they're so wide, the army would have to be setting up, thinking, all right, my legion's going to die if they come through. I have to make sure I've got units looking inward to be able to hit them. But then you're exposing the flanks of them to the front. Yeah, it's a puzzle that I don't want to play with.
I'd love to see someone put in some time to model a Legion in a really interesting way, though. That could be cool.
That's true.
Multi-base a legion, so you start with it, and then
Yeah, that's right.
Regrets.
As if
After
anyone's
a
not
couple
going to
games.
make 2 hordes, right? Or even 4 troops. But yeah, multi-base the crap out of it. Get like some wicked scene happening in the middle with a bunch of ogres beating each other up or something.
Okay, so we're pretty much saying regiments and hordes.
Regiments are good.
Probably not taking the extra, the exchanging the shields for 2-handed weapons, and crocodiles, maybe, if you got 5 points left over and there's nothing else
if you
left.
got 5 wounds.
Yeah.
And like hordes with extra weapon for the crushing 2 is a nice solid damage output. There's nothing wrong with that.
All right. So the other one the other large infantry that we don't see that often is the hunters. So speed 7,
these
so
guys.
a little bit quicker. Melee 3, no range. Defense 4, they come in regiments and horde as well. Unit strength 2 and 3. Attacks 9 and 18. With the nerve 12, 14 and 15, 17. Points 135 and 225. So I think they've had a little bit of a points buff recently. So lots of special rules on these guys. So they've got brutal, crushing strength 1, so pretty much like every other ogre. But now they've got ensnare, Pathfinder, and Slayer melee 3. So Slayer being up against big monster boys, they get an extra D3 attacks. They've got a tag-on option there of the crocodile as well. Bensome, you like these guys, don't you?
I love them. I think these guys with the Brew of Haste, it puts them up to 245, but that makes them a really solid cavalry unit, speed 8, with Pathfinder built in and ensnare. Icing is the Slayer for hitting your big boys, which they will be. That's what you go after. I think they're fantastic because they like hiding in the forest, so the defense isn't so bad because the guys that are charging them are probably going to be hindered, hopefully, or they'll get the cover with any shooting, and then they'll zip out with their threat range of 16.
Yeah.
Yeah, 240. They're a slightly cheap, so 240 with a +1 speed. I was thinking exactly the same thing. Bensome read my mind that because the reason for +1 speed, I think primarily is that being speed 7 is great, but being speed 8 means that you can threaten cav, and cavalry can't just sit 2 inches away from you because most cav is speed 8. Of course, there's some speed 9 and 10 stuff that's going to outrange you, but generally they're less hitty kinds of things that don't want to charge into a ensnare unit. So yeah, they do the similar thing to the Chariots, but a little bit cheaper, point for point. The Chariots for about 30 points more, and really they're more than that. They're more like 50 points more once you give them Pathfinder, which is a closer comparison, I think. The Chariots hit harder and have a bit of a higher nerve and a higher defense, so they're like a more powerful version of the unit, but then they don't have that ensnare, and they're obviously about 50 points more. So I think one of those 2 units is a really useful thing to have, at least in my head. I think having that speed in your army somewhere is important, and hunters are a good alternative to the Chariots.
Yeah, underrated unit, I think.
Yeah, I think they're awesome.
And when they're hitting the big chunky dragons, which are usually melee 3 with reduced attacks, usually like between 9 and 12, the ensnare then kicks into effect, making them to 4, and then that sort of helps with their defense, and it means they survive, and then they're getting extra attacks because of the Slayer. Yeah,
another useful comparison, I think, is comparing them to a regiment compared to the regiment of warriors. So they're 15 points more, but then, and they have 1 less defense. So they're a little bit less good defensively against like things with a mediocre amount of crushing, perhaps like Crush 1 or something like that. Because the ensnare and the defense is basically a wash, but they're actually more defensively strong against things with a lot of crushing, like Bensome was saying there with the dragon. If you've got Crush 3 or more, then your ensnare actually still does the work, while it's the defense does not. And also ensnare, of course, can stack on with if they're being hindered through terrain. So if you can use terrain well, a regiment of hunters for that extra 15 points is going to hold up units quite a bit better than a regiment of warriors is, especially if they're like hiding in forests and stuff, which is very themey for a hunter. And I think that's actually pretty cool little option.
So outside of speed, any other items that you'd put on?
no, speed or nothing for me.
Yeah, I can't think of anything in particular that I'd want, because I'm thinking of them as more of a defensive unit in the regiment, and in the horde it's more like a pounce on a big thing. I guess you could give them a crushing item or something. It's not too bad. But I'd rather speed.
Yeah, I'm a bit disappointed that the Slayer is not doubled for a horde. Like, it's the same for the regiment as well as the horde with D3. I'd like D6 on a horde, maybe.
Yeah, that'd be cool,
Maybe I'm
actually.
just being greedy. I don't know.
Slayer
Yeah,
D3
they're
is
great.
more of like a gravy, like fluff thing and anything else, right? Because it's pretty small buff, like a lot of the time.
But
that's
if you
gonna
get
be-
into a flank, that's...
If you get into a flank of a
considerable.
monster, yeah, sure. It's useful, don't get me wrong.
'Cause-
It's just, I wouldn't like be like, yep, Slayer's really the thing that makes this unit great. It's more like it's a little minor.
It's a
extra.
cherry.
Yeah. Next is Berserker Braves, the powerful brave Berserker friendos. They have speed 6, melee 4, range dash, and defense 4. So you'll notice as compared to warriors right away, they've dropped a melee and a defense. They have a regiment or a horde. Regiment is unit strength 2, 15 attacks, dash 15 nerve, and 140 points. The horde is unit strength 3, 30 attacks, dash 18 nerve, and 230 points. They are brutal, crush 1, and wild charge D3. So they're a little
These
bit more
were always
expensive
a staple for
than
me.
their warrior counterparts, and they have worse stats, but they have a lot of attacks. So I say worse stats. They have one less melee and they have one less defense, which definitely matters. But they're a little bit quicker, and Wild Charge is great on a movement 6 unit. It's really good. And then they also just have a bucket load of attacks. Quantity over quality.
Yeah, I think if you're not taking hunters, the speed on these guys is really good too. Speed 7 with wild charge.
Oh yeah.
On the horde, you don't see them often as the horde because the regiment is really good and it works well with the warlocks, which we'll talk about later. I think one of their biggest positives is the fact that fearless 15, no worried about getting wavered.
They're good chaff in that regiment size, I think, for 140 points. So yeah, it's pretty costly. But the dash 15,
Thick chaff.
you've got to deal with them, and 15 attacks, they'll hurt, and you can't give them a flank or else they'll destroy units. And that wild charge D3 is always something that, because they're speed 6, so they keep up with some of the quicker armies like the Ratkin, etc. But that D3 just gives them the edge, and so they can often just sit back and wait until they roll a 5 or a 6 on the wild charge and go, all right, now I've actually got a little bit more range here. So they're quite dangerous, I think, in the regiment form.
Also, once again, for against units with Crush 3 or more, this is your better unit to block those kinds of units up than a warrior unit, because while warriors are defense 5, these guys have the better nerve. So dash 18 on a regiment as compared to 15, 17, there's no, like, if you're getting those kinds of medium amounts of damage through, 7 or 8 wounds on them, that kind of thing, the warriors are very likely to end up wavered. These guys are all too often, I don't know how many times against Bensome's ogres I've managed to get, like, you know how it is with fearless units, you always do one less
Just
than
miss.
you need, and you're like, damn it, you're like one, you end up rolling up 17 nerve on them, and then they just hit you back at full force, and you're like, man, that hurt. So yeah, fearless is so good.
I find the hordes are also difficult to sort of work with, because I like them with speed, but you sort of need them with Pathfinder, because if they become hindered, then
Melee
hitting on
5.
5s, they're just as effective as bloody a goblin horde.
Yeah, true. I think that would be a lock if you're taking the horde. 30 attacks, you just can't afford to be dropping
No,
to melee 5 at all.
that hurts so much.
Yeah. I actually overall prefer the warriors. I think they're just a really good unit for the points, because these guys, you do pay 20 and 30 points more respectively. So you are really paying for that wild charge and the fearlessness, unlike undead who don't seem to pay for fearless. These guys are actually paying for it. And yeah, they've got a lot of attacks, so they're more so than the warriors, who are kind of quite self-contained for their points, and they kind of do what that says on the tin. These guys, I feel like they need a little help with an item, and you give them an item, because another crushing is really tempting too when you have
horde.
crush 1 and that many attacks, right? So crushing or Pathfinder, as you say, or speed, there's so many things that can take these guys up to the next level and make them feel more like a hammer unit. But you are paying quite a few points. Just like warriors are very efficient for the points.
Yeah.
I still like don't get me wrong, I still like a regiment or a horde of these in your armies, but my core would be warriors in ogres rather than braves. That's me personally. It's a preference thing there.
I know we'll discuss it a little bit later, but I think now's a pretty good time to mention one of the key power points of the Ogre Army, and that is the Ogre Warlocks having the Ogre Warlock special rule. Beautifully named, I thought. So that's for each large infantry regiment, horde, or legion within 6 inches of the Ogre Warlocks. They will increase the amount of dice rolled for Drain Life, Fireball, Lightning Bolt, and Mind Fog by 1, up to a maximum of 3. So for Huw there with his warriors, for 120 points, you're not only getting a nice regiment, but you're actually creating a ranged threat as well. It's really, really common to run these guys with Lightning Bolt, and it just makes the Warlocks really, really strong.
Yep. Okay, so let's go on to the last of the standard troops, which they're a bit ridiculous, and you'll see why in a sec. The Siege Breakers. So these are speed 6, melee 3, no ranged, defense 5. Regiment and hordes, unit strength 2 and 3, 9 and 18 attacks like standard large infantry. 12, 14 nerve on the regiment, 15, 17 on the horde at 145 and 240 points respectively. But these guys come with big shield, brutal and crushing strength 2. So there's defense 6 in the front. That's pretty solid considering the points. I mean, the recent
It's
update
nuts.
has increased their
It's
defense
so
from 4 to
good.
5, so getting them in the flank isn't even that worrisome. But yeah, they're crazy.
If you just take a warrior regiment or horde, so same deal. In the regiment, you pay 25 points, and in the horde, you pay 40 points to go from defense 5 to, well, they're the same defense, I guess, but 6 in the front you get, and you get a crush
Yep.
strength. And for me, that's worth the
yeah.
points more often than not. The defense 6 in the front is awesome, but even just the extra crushing as well is, that's 30-point item. Or was it 40 in a horde? I forget.
It's 40. Brew of Strength is 40 for the Horde.
For the same price as giving a warrior horde the Brew of Strength, you get that cheeky defense 6 in the front for free.
Yeah.
Yeah, so these guys here are the bee's knees. So if you have a look at a lot of tournament lists, you'll see these in pretty much all lists, just because they're that
In
good.
triplicate?
In triplicate, yeah. I think there was even the Lone Wolf tournament. There was a guy that was taking 5 hordes of these in 2300.
He should have had a resub,
A resub.
because that's just so boring, man. I don't want to play
And then
5
when you
hordes of the same
combine
thing, sorry.
these Defense 6/Defense 5 fellas with the Warlock's boosted Drain Life or Nomag's boosted Heal, because you've got other regiments about, giving them, 7 on the dice, 7 different dice to heal them back. It's painful. Yep.
Yeah, they feel like they should be 10 or 20 points more, because they kind of invalidate their friends around that similar value a little bit for me.
I wouldn't give them items either.
I don't mind the Staying Stone on it, just to keep the
Yeah,
nerve
5
nice and
points,
high,
yeah.
or the Fury item. I've seen a lot as well.
Yeah, you want them hidden
Yeah,
back.
you don't want your expensive unit just getting wavered, do you? So, yeah, I can see that. That makes sense.
And, if you manage to waver a Siegebreaker and you're like, yes! And then they come back with Fury, it pretty much kills you, because it would have been the second attack. So, oof.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to the weirdos.
The weirdos.
Monsters
I
of the
like
group.
these guys. So this is a new addition to the list, and it's the Crocodile Wrangler. So this one here is speed 6 and melee 3, no range, defense 4. It's got no unit strength, because it is a monster, but just on a cav base. It's got a whopping 7 attacks, and nerve is only 11-13 for 110 points. Special rules, it's got a lot. Crushing Strength 1, it's got Duelist, Individual, Through the Legs, which is a special one that we'll get to in a moment, and Vicious Melee, Wild Charge D3 plus 1, and it's also got the keywords Beast, Crocodile, and Goblin. So Through the Legs is for all friendly core units with the Ogre keyword. They do not block line of sight, and they can be charged through by the Crocodile Wrangler, as long as it ends its movement clear. So what this means is that you can sit it behind all of your Ogre regiments that we've just gone through, and it can literally charge through with its extra range and effectively block units. So pretty cool little special rule, I think.
This is the most Bensome unit I think I've ever read.
Yeah, it's my favourite unit of the list. I love them.
I'm not surprised. And that Through the Legs is a deceptively powerful rule. I actually played Bensome on... We were trying out TTS.
Tabletop. Yeah.
Tabletop simulator version of Kings of War recently, which has come a long way, by the way. It's really good. And Crocodile Wranglers, I think you took... Was it just 2, Bensome?
2.
But
Yep.
they were a nightmare to deal with. Like it's almost impossible to counter them, unlike other chaff units, because they just stand behind your regiment. I mean, if they had speed 8, they'd be completely broken. But at speed 6, I guess at least it's manageable. You can stay out of their range to some extent. But they stand behind your regiment or horde of ogres. They're virtually impossible to target with anything or damage in any way. And then they just shoot out, and they do really reasonable damage. Like they pack a
attacks on 3.
punch.
Yeah.
With Vicious and Crush 1, yeah.
7 attacks with 3s, Crush 1, Vicious. It helped that Bensome was repeatedly rolling off his tits, as he likes to do with these kinds of units, but belting out 6 or 7 damage each time they charge anything. But even with 3 or 4 damage, which is kind of what they'll quite frequently do with melee 3, Vicious, and the rest of it, they're really kind of threatening, especially if you have a couple of them that are able to combo charge something.
That's why I like them in pairs.
Yeah, for these guys, the biggest weakness that you can get with ogres is you start to block yourself up. You can get chaffed up, and then you get flanked, right? That's pretty much the only way that you can take off siege breakers relatively easy. So the Crocodile counters the counter. So where you have your siege breakers, your Crocodile sits slightly behind, you chaff up the siege breakers, and then the siege breakers can just literally move backwards, and the Crocodile comes out And with 7 attacks, as we've just gone through, Crush 1, Vicious, Wild Charge, it's getting there. And then it can take out the chaff, and now you've protected your siege breakers, and you've wasted a chaff unit effectively for your opponent. So it's a counter to the counter, and it's an amazing investment for 110
Exactly
points.
right. Yeah, exactly right. It's like you pay a bit more than a chaff unit, which you typically want to be sub 100 points, and the closer to like 60, the better, I guess. So you're paying an extra 20, 30 points on a chaff unit, but they can beat up chaff units. Like they will cream, you know, your little Vermintide kind of regiment and like your 5 Gobbo dog friendos or whatever else. They'll beat them up. Admittedly, they probably won't be able to outcharge them, but that through the legs completely makes up for that. Because as soon as they get close to your regiment, you can, just get them out there and chomp on enemy cav, or hold up a 260-point monster if you want, which is what Bensome did with them.
Yep.
and eventually beat it in combat, which is stupid, but yeah.
Yeah, I think the Wild Charge D3+1 is also a bit of a gotcha that can happen, because this can just literally sit behind a giant big unit. And then
Maximum 16-inch range.
Yeah, 16-inch range that it can potentially roll up to, and then you charge out, and even though it's individual and you could like run over the top, as soon as it does a wound, you now can't. And this thing is going to reliably put out at least 1 wound.
That's true. It's also it's worth understanding that the range is kind of a bit less than that, because they are often charging through a unit, so you have to add an extra, 3-4 inches, something like that, to that range. So it ends up being functionally closer to 12 from the unit it's charging out from, or something along those lines. Maybe even 10 or 11. But still, that protection that it gives you, and if they don't have much shooting or anything to threaten it with, you don't have to put it behind your ogres. It's such a small base, you can just squeeze it in between a unit and just, whatever.
Yeah, pretty much. And because it's individual, it's also hard to shoot at, so it's only really lightning bolts that you've got to worry about killing this little guy.
Yeah, they're so fun.
And good luck targeting it with a lightning bolt.
I think
Unless
also,
you've got mind screeches specifically that are able to see over the other ogres to zap at them. Pretty much any other lightning bolt unit is just not going to get line of sight on them.
Yeah, I think also the reasons why I like them in pairs is because, like how I worked them against yourself, Huw, is having one in the front and then getting one in the flank, and then you can't overrun one into the other. So you hit one, you might waver it, I'll back that one up, charge the other guy with the flank, and so you're still getting munched on while the wizards heal the first one up and then send the other one back in.
Yeah, having individuals in your flank is so annoying too, because you can't afford
disengage.
to turn and face them. Sure, they don't get to double their attacks, but with the reliability of these guys' attacks, I don't know why they're melee 3, honestly. I feel like they should be melee 4, but because they're just a friggin' crocodile, but I guess they know how to use their fangs. But yeah, they get in there with 7 on 3s and crush 1 vicious. They're just super duper reliable, and you can't just ignore it. If you just keep letting it bite at your flanks, if it charges you 3 turns in a row, it's doing really meaningful damage to your horde or your regiment or whatever. And it's 110 points. Like, if you compare that to what like fighty characters are, like what their stats and things are, they're so much killier than your typical individual at anywhere near that points level. Like most individuals at that kind of level have sort of 4 or 5 attacks.
Usually a bit more nerve.
Rarely would they have vicious. Probably a bit more nerve, that's fair. But then they can't just charge through their own units and hide with impunity either. So,
It's probably another little one there, and probably the last thing that I'll mention about the Crocodile Wrangler is just that duelist as well. You'll catch people out thinking that you've blocked line of sight, and then this guy can just charge through and get to an individual, a rival individual, and now all of a sudden he's got 14 attacks on 3s with Crush 1 and Vicious. So just take it off. Just snake eyes it.
Yeah, that's really scary for opponents' individuals who are usually kind of useful against ogres and can effectively run rings around them, because all their other individual, all their other characters that are not individuals can't turn to face your sneaky individual that's running around. Even if it's just your wizard who's just like hanging out by the units feeling safe. This guy has that sort of... I don't think he's primarily an assassin. He's like a chaff clearer. He's a unit harasser. He's a chaff unit in himself in a pinch. but then he's also like he's a massive deterrent for enemy individuals, and the range is really long for against enemy individuals. Yeah, this unit is really good.
Totally agree with that.
How about you tell us about your other favourite unit here, the Red Goblin Blaster?
The Red Goblin Blaster, the second most Bensome unit in this army. So this is a chariot, unit size 1. It's speed 5, melee 3, range 5, defense 5, 3 attacks for 65 points. So sure, it's just a straight up chaff unit, right? Defense 5, but dash 10 nerve. So you'll take it out relatively easily, but you better not fluff it because it's got blast D6, it's got boom, it's brutal, and crush 3. Plus, for some reason, it has makeshift grenades, which are 12-inch blast D3, piercing 1, little tiny harassment chuck things.
They never hit anything because it's not steady aim, so you'll be moving or you're turning, and then they're hitting on 6s.
Yeah,
That's
nearly
without
always on
cover.
6s, right? So you're right. But it feels as though it should have steady aim, but I'm glad it doesn't because it's already incredibly good for 65 points. And the main reason it's incredibly good, you guys go, oh, well, it's only, it's very unreliable, whatever else. No, it's the threat. It can charge in and do blast D6 with each of those attacks. So it should hit 2 times, 3 attacks, melee 3, right? And then it does 2d6, crushing 3 hits on you, which is nasty enough for a 65-point unit. Yeah, it dies afterwards. That's what boom does. It basically just blows up and disappears afterwards.
Yeah, if
but it's a chaff
successfully
unit
hit, then it dies.
it can sit with its unit strength 1. It can just sit on an objective or whatever, and it can just threaten flanks. And the best thing you can do with this unit is instead of charging it forwards, you have it hovering around your lines and just threatening and hanging back a bit. It's only speed 5, so you're not going to get the drop on anything. And you just force your opponent to think about it, force your opponent to deal with it. Because if they get flanked by this, it's going to nuke a goddamn horde for 65 points, unlike every other chaff unit in the game that's even remotely equivalent costed. So you really can't afford to ignore it as an opponent. It doesn't have the speed that a chaff unit needs to be effective, but what it does have is an incredible amount of threat.
Yep. Green tick of approval there, Hugh. That is perfect.
And a lot of the time in my games, like I won't even send them out and fight. They'll just hold a quarter or an objective for 65 points.
Yeah, I think how Bensome uses it's perfect though. So it just lurks out the back. It uses that unit strength 1 for the late game objective holding, and I think Bensome, I don't see you ever charge this thing into the front at all, but you're just waiting for that flank. And then the flank is when you actually charge in and commit. Otherwise, you just use it as a unit strength 1.
Yeah, because otherwise, it's like if you're going into the front just because, then you're sort of wasting its 65 points. It's more effective as a psychological piece for your opponent.
That's right. I think it's definitely
Or
effective
cheap objective.
in those books. I get triggered just seeing them across the table.
I've been
Although
using these things.
they're
for
much
years,
less
so
scary
it's-
than they used to be, but they're still pretty nasty.
Yeah, I think they've lost a bit of flavour now that you can't hurt your own fellas, because I thought that was the best bit about them, that risk reward. But anyway, let's move on to the last monster / chariot is the mammoth. So this has got 2 bits to it, which will take a bit longer. Maybe we should have had a break. No, too bad. We're committing. So this is the mammoth on a chariot size, speed 7, melee 4, no ranged with defense 5. Unit strength 1, 12 attacks, fearless 18 for 220 points. Now this boy has brutal, crushing 2, thunder 2, rampage in melee d6, and strider. But you can also give it a once-off upgrade, the big deal. So that increases the brutal to 2, it gains very expiring, and call to greatness for 30 points. Alright. So the call to greatness is as long as the unit is present and in play on the table, at the start of each of your melee phases, you can select a single friendly core unit with the Ogre keyword within 12, regardless of range or line of sight. That's a bit weird because it gives you a range. Anyway, the selected unit is granted brutal +1 until the start of the next turn. So it's just handing out additional brutal for your Ogre friends. And that's for 30 points. Why would you not take that? very inspiring, extra brutal.
Yeah, you do. If you're taking a mammoth, you're taking the big deal.
No-brainer.
This is a mantic giant hug out to Jesse Cornwell, who passed away as well. So it's kind of a big deal. And yeah, he managed to. He got Strider on these guys. He was talking about that for years.
Yep.
Managed to get it over the line. So thank you, Jesse, for Strider.
That's awesome. I love that something like that can happen with the community, right? Like that someone can have an effect on the actual game rules and that become part of the, public consciousness of the players. It's really cool.
Got to say, though, I've never taken a mammoth.
Yeah, why doesn't anyone take these things? They seem pretty good to me.
You're starting to see them now that the big deal has come in, that rule.
Defense 5 Fearless
Makes
18. Sense. I think it's a better giant for sure.
And I like giants. I think they're good. So yeah, I'd take a mammoth. Plus, it's a mammoth. Like, it's a mammoth. That's cool, right?
It is cool.
Does Mantic have a model for this?
They don't yet.
Yeah, I don't think so yet.
Maybe we'll see more of them once they come out with a model. Hope they do actually, because it'd be interesting to see what they did with this one.
Otherwise, solid. If you're going to take a big monster, take it.
All right. We've decided not to have a break yet, and we're going to push through the last two titans here with the Red Goblin Slasher. Have not seen one of these on the tabletop yet, but they are speed 7, melee 3, range of 5, defense of 5. They've got unit strength 1, 10 attacks with a nerve of 16-18 for 210 points. Because they're a titan, they are height 6. So they can see right over the top. So crushing strength 2 with Strider, and their ranged attack is a sharp stick thrower. So 36-inch range, only 2 attacks, blast D3, piercing 2 with steady aim. They do get an option that I'm not sure why you would ever take, but that gives you an Aura of Fury, but only for goblins, and it's for 15 points. Bensome, tell me why you're not taking this.
Because you have all the other things that are worth it, and you're not taking the Goblin Fury item because you don't have any goblins. 210 points for reasonably effective melee, but when you've got a mammoth for just a little bit more, which is way more effective, doesn't have the room. There's no space for it.
Yep.
It's kind of doing that thing as well, isn't it, where it's trying to play such a hybrid role because it's got that sharp stick thrower, which is a reasonable war machine, actually. Like 2 attacks, blast D3, pierce
On
2,
5s.
steady aim. It's honestly not bad. Yeah, on 5s, but like that's what war machines usually roll. With steady aim,
difference
it's
is
just
like you're not spamming the sharp stick thrower because it's on a 210 point Goblin Slasher.
That's what I mean. It's playing that hybrid role between a war machine, which should be like, 80, 90 points, something like that, and this monster, which is sort of a bit of a mediocre monster. It's not a bad monster, I guess.
It's reasonable in a goblin list.
3s. Yeah. It's all right. I don't mind it, but it is trying to sort of play multiple roles a bit.
There's better shooting options and there's better combat options. So for points.
Only 10 attacks.
Yeah.
Crushing 2 for 210 points. That's no.
I have a 10 attack, crush 2, melee 3 unit in the giant rat fiend, the mutant rat fiend, and it's a very similar cost.
Yeah, but
has
your
one
ratkin
less
don't
defense.
have a ton of large infantry that has really good damage output. Whereas the
in fact, you have done no large infantry that put good damage.
That's true.
Well, nightmares sort of.
Yeah. Don't get Huw
sort of.
started on nightmares, God.
But like, why take a Goblin Slasher when you can take a horde of warriors?
I kind of like it, actually. I think it's cool. And I just think conversion-wise, you could come up with a really interesting model for it, with like a big old crossbow on the top. I think it's pretty
30
cool.
points more, you could get a horde of siege breakers.
Yeah. I suppose that's the real problem, isn't it? Is that everybody's just going to trade them out for the big, nasty ogre units.
10 points more, you take a mammoth.
And in fact, that's kind of the history. That's the history of this whole list as I'm reading through it. Get to more of that at the end, I guess, in summary. But it seems to be a problem for the internal balance of the ogres. So, Giant is the last Titan on our list. So he's speed 7, melee 4, defense 5, unit strength 1, d6 plus 8 attacks, 18, 20 nerve, so a couple more than the slasher. And a couple more than the mammoth as well. 225 points. So 5 points more than the Mammoth. He does have Brutal Crush 4, which is cool. I like how Giants are like pretty much the only things that have Crush 4. Fury, Slayer, Melee D6. That's pretty awesome. So he can go up to 2d6 plus 8 attacks against anything big enough. And then he has Strider as well. So Fury's really nice on a dash 18-20 piece. Like, you're not wavering him anytime soon against Defense 5. He's very, very solid. But the D6 plus 8 attacks on Melee 4 are very unreliable. So I really like what they've done with Giants giving them Slayer, because their problem, they were always a bit of an Anvil-style Titan, weren't they? Because their damage output, while it can be solid, like if you roll 14 attacks and get 10 hits, which is quite unlikely, then, you know, you're doing some really solid damage. But the vast majority of the time, you're in the like 3-4 damage kind of range, which is not that good. Maybe half a dozen for a 225 point unit. And again, comparing them with a horde of ogres or something, they're not looking too favourable. But defensively, they are rock solid, like a much higher nerve than your ogre hordes and things. And against
Defense 5.
I think this Slayer puts them in a really good spot. You can duel other monsters really effectively because you've got 2d6 plus 8 attacks, which is probably more attacks than they have, like almost certainly, especially if you roll high on those d6s. And then you've got a higher nerve than most of them as well. Plus, Crush 4 means you're winning any of them on 2s, even Defense 6. So he just becomes this monster slayer, which I think is really cool.
Why don't you see them as much, Bensome? Like, you just don't see Giants.
I think it's the points. No, I think it's the 225 points and unit strength 1. That might be what's hurting them.
I think you don't see them enough because people haven't realised the usefulness of that Slayer yet, in all honesty.
It also makes them, because of that, it also gives them a bigger target. And because they're height 6, you're never going to hide them. So a lot of their shooting is going to be focused to bring it down so their big gribbly fly thing doesn't get thumped by a giant.
Yeah, true. The Titan base definitely comes in as well. Because it used to be that the Giants were just on 50 mil squares. Now they're on 75 squares.
Just monster bases, yeah.
So, yeah, it's a bit more unruly. All right.
I mean, that's still good. I love a double giant list, but that's 450 points.
Such a nice centerpiece model again. I know I've talked about that with the previous 2 Titans too, but I feel like ogres, for me, seeing them across the table, they can kind of blur together from like a modeling standpoint to like, it's a bunch of fat dudes with various like, you know, different weapons and helmets and stuff, whatever, you know, kind of blurs together. Having a centerpiece model or 2, whether it be any one of those 3 Titans, I think, can add a little bit of je ne sais quoi to your otherwise dull-looking Ogre Army, potentially.
What if we bumped up the Giant to unit strength 2? Would that change anything?
Oh, you might be pushing it. I mean, that makes them pretty good.
I don't think that would change things that much, but I think it would be cool.
Well, I'm just thinking,
I mean, you can't,
one of the major things about taking any of the other, so siege breakers or warriors or boomers, etc., is that all of a sudden your unit strength is like tripled, right? As soon as you go in, spending exactly the same amount of points. But if you just bumped up the Giant to a unit strength 2 as a Titan on the big base now, with the extra tweaks, I think it's maybe start seeing it, because it's more the competitive scenario play that I think keeps the Giant out of the game, because of the unit strength up for the same price.
I think unit strength 2 will make them too good because they're so hard to shift as well. So you're trying to focus them down with the things that hit hard, which are usually your bigger boys, but this thing likes to hit the bigger boys.
I don't think it's that big a problem. The unit... I mean, all it does is beat unit strength 1 units, right? Like,
which are the big monsters.
Yeah. So it beats other monsters, which is kind of what it's meant to do anyway. And like, I think that's okay that it's bigger and tougher and therefore more able to take. Like a regiment, most regiments, any regiment over 100 points is still going to be more unit strength than it, like contesting an objective and stuff. So I don't think unit strength 2 things is kind of a sweet spot that perhaps might be a bit underutilized. I think you're kind of onto something there, Sally.
Okay, let's go and take another break, and when we come back, we will go over the leaders of the Ogre Army.
Ogres either carry giant crossbows the size of small ballista, or fearsome blunderbusses that are more akin to short-range cannons than any firearm a man might wield. Their crossbows are powerful enough to punch a hole in the thickest of armor and knock a man 10 feet backwards when hit. An experience, needless to say, he is unlikely to survive, while their blunderbusses kick out a wall of scrap and shot that will mash anything in front of it to mincemeat, especially when an entire group of boomers open fire at once. Both these oversized weapons are ordinarily crafted for the ogres by the dwarves, who are delighted by the deep pockets of the shooters, as the shooters are by the dwarves' meticulous expertise. Once an ogre shooter feels the irresistible pull of home and hearth, he heads back up north. He will take his pride and joy with him, where it will be much admired by his kinfolk, and usually passed on to his eldest son.
Okay, here we go. We're down to the final stretch, sort of. I'm not sure. Maybe. We'll see. Ogre Warlock, that's the first leader on our list. So this is a large infantry spellcaster, tier 1. Speed 6, melee 4, no ranged, defense 4. Unit strength 1 with 2 attacks. 12-14 nerve for 95 points. Standard ogre stuff of having brutal and crushing 1, but the warlock now inspires, is nimble, and has the Ogre Warlock rule, which we went over before. And built in, comes with Lightning Bolt 3. The options that you can take are Mind Fog 1, which doesn't seem like that great, but when you factor in Ogre Warlock rule, it's not bad for 10 points. Blood Boil 1 for 30 points. Fireball 8 for 25. Drain Life 5 for 20. You can increase its spellcasting tier for 10 points, and Incantation of the Tempest for 10 points, and then you've got all the other Library of Arcane Knowledge spells. So read the Clash of Kings book if you need a refresher on that. Ogre Warlock, one of the best leaders that the ogres have. 95 point inspiring with Lightning Bolt 3 to 6 built in, depending on how many ogres you've got around you. They could probably have taken off the Berserker keyword now, because the Warlock used to only inspire Berserkers.
Having the Ogre Warlock inspire everything is a bit of overkill.
Yeah.
Quite a few of the units that used to inspire just one thing have become like 5 or 10 points undercosted, in my opinion.
Yeah, don't think the Warlock should inspire anymore.
I don't think it should inspire, no.
Take an Ogre Warlock, knock in your regiment-sized units to buff like with the Ogre Warlock rule, give it Drain Life. So early game, first 3 turns, you're just lightning bolting, weakening targets that your hordes are going to charge into. Late game, you drain life. So you're taking wounds off your opponents that are in combat and then buffing up your defense 6 units. Handles all 6-7 turns perfectly.
The maximum extra dice for Ogre Warlock is +3. So it'll be maximum of lightning 6, but still. Give it the boomstick for some extra lightning fun.
Yeah, very cheap for a lot of lightning there. And then you can still claim an objective late game and inspire your troops. There's really just no downside.
Yep. It's 12-14. It's reasonable for a wizard. Defense 4.
And if they weren't inspiring, you'd probably see 1 per army with the inspiring talisman, maybe occasionally still 2. But the fact that they are inspiring means you can give them other items. You can, not take banner bearers and things like that in your army, not have that kind of attacks, and just laugh all the way to the bank, where you get everything for under 100 points.
And I think it's the Ogre Warlock rule, now that he inspires everything, is probably why we're not seeing shooters as much, because in isolation an Ogre Warlock is good,
Lightning Bolt.
but when you put in 2, potentially 3 Warlocks, all of a sudden that's a lot of Lightning Bolt that's going out there. That's more reliable than some of the shooter unit.
Yeah, that's a fair point. So you don't need your shooters as much when you've got all that lining. Still, you could use some of the Library of Arcane Knowledge spells as well if you wanted to. I don't know. Don't know that I necessarily would, outside of something like Alchemist Curse, maybe.
Maybe bark skin for the crocodile wranglers.
I was trying to think of a use for a bark skin, but actually on crocodile wranglers, that would be upsetting. That's such a Bensome move, doing something like that.
Yeah, I have seen Scorched Earth a couple of times on Ogre Warlocks, just because it's a nice defense to their defense 6 front line. So you can make them
I like
hindered,
that.
so they charge in against your defense 6 with pool noodles instead of their spears.
Yeah, I like that actually quite a bit. And in fact, I've mentioned it a few times, but I think one puzzle you've kind of got to solve with ogres, especially if you're doing like an aggressive attacky army, which you probably are if you're playing ogres, solving that kind of when you come up against that regular elf list that has like a bunch of Drakon riders and a bunch of like impactful characters or something, like the really fast hitty list that can just they're effectively trying to do the same thing that you're doing, but all the units like outrange you a bit. You've got to have ways of stopping them just having the play of the table, and that's sort of one way you could do that, as well as the previous options we've talked about with a couple of speed 8 units.
Next up, in the large infantry heroes, and there is quite a few of them, is the Sergeant. So speed 6, melee 3, no range, defense 5. He has unit strength 1, so can get all your sneaky objectives. 5 attacks, nerve is 13-15 for 110 points. Brutal, crushing strength 2, elite, inspiring, nimble, steady aim, with quite a lot of options. 4 options here, so he can exchange his shield for a 2-handed weapon, obviously going down to defense 4, but getting crush strength 3. He can exchange the shield for a heavy crossbow, lowering defense down to 4, but gets a heavy crossbow for a 30-inch range, 5+ pierce 2 type of attack there. Obviously, you can't take the previous 2 combinations together. You can also give him a crocodog, and you can also mount him in a chariot, increasing his speed up to 8, gaining Thunderous Charge 1, and changing to, obviously, a hero on a chariot with height 4 for 30 points. Lots of options on this guy. 5 attacks with elite means that he's always converting. I don't mind him on the chariot.
Yeah, 130? Yeah. No, 140, you're right.
140.
Yeah, 140 is... I like that quite a bit on the Sergeant. Plus, how cool is it having like a big old ogre on a chariot just like whipping his dudes along? I reckon that's pretty cool.
It's okay. With the 13-15 nerve hurts it in that respect because it won't take as much to counter it and take it off. It's sort of in a weird spot for me. I'm not sure I would take the Sergeant, especially when you've got a Warlock about which does the inspiring, or you just take a Berserker Bully, which we'll get to later. Yeah, weird spot.
So the Sergeants have actually been popping up in quite a few lists around the world with the heavy crossbow. So even though it does hit on 5s with Pierce 2, it does complement the Warlock's shooting, and because it's got 5 attacks with elite, it can actually reasonably reliably chip away at wounds while still giving some backline defense. So yeah, one has been popping up, as in one Sergeant has been popping up in lists quite frequently.
I could see that. So you're what, 25 points more than a Warlock. Your shooting is a little bit less effective, but then you've also got like a bit of a punch in melee.
And still is nimble with steady aim as well, so he can just move around and shoot however the hell he wants.
And 13-15 nerve for those points is actually pretty damn good.
Yep, definitely. With unit strength 1. Hell yeah.
Yeah, I could definitely see that actually. I think the guy with a crossbow is not too shabby. I'd be tempted to give it to him unless you wanted him to be like chonky chaff, which he kind of does okay as well. Just like run in the front of units and be like 13-15, defense 5, sucked in. I'm 110 points. Just straight up as he is not too bad. But I'd probably rather a Crocodile Wrangler for 107 for the same cost. So I guess Boomer Sergeant is next in the list. He is a kind of similar guy. Speed 6, melee 4, range 4 though, defense 4, 4 attacks, not 5. Definitely feels as though he wants 5 quite badly, but 4 attacks, 11-13 nerve, and 90 points. He's got Brutal, Crush 1, Nimble, Boomstick, which is a 12-inch attack 8, Pierce 1, steady aim. Whew. Whew.
Why don't
That
these
is
guys
not
inspire?
bad. Why don't they inspire? Thank God they don't inspire.
Because they're 90 points.
So this is really similar to a lot of War Machines, actually, that are around that 90-point range. I'm thinking specifically of the Ratkin one, of course, but there's also the Abyssal Dwarf one and the Goblin one, the Goblin thingo. They tend to have 10 attacks, while this guy's got 8.
But this guy
for
scores.
around the same cost. But this guy scores, that's right. And he can do like
on him.
a couple of damage in combat as well.
Yeah.
I like this guy with the Boots of Levitation.
Oh, yeah.
That used to be one of my staples, being able to just move 12, turn, shoot. and keep out of charge range while breathing on them with his 8 attacks.
With his
While still being a scoring unit. That's not too bad at all. I don't mind that. The problem with him is that he could be an ogre warlock for 5 more points and do like a similar amount of damage over the course of the game with lightning, but also inspire.
Yeah.
It's almost like the change so that ogre warlocks inspire everyone kind of affects a lot of these characters.
Yeah, you used to see these a little bit. As you've just said, the warlock is a 7-turn unit. This is really the last 3 turns, or last 4 turns, that it's actually going to be able to get in range with its 12-inch and provide some service. Where I think the warlock is, from turn 1, it's ready to go.
Plus the warlock has more versatility because you can take other spells and stuff. You don't have to just lightning bolt. Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the Warlock without spells and slightly cheaper. So the Army Standard, Speed 6, Melee 3, no range, Defense 5, 1 unit strength, 3 attacks, 11, 13 nerve for 70 points, Brutal Crushing 1, and Inspiring and Nimble. You can give him a Chariot if you want, 30 points, bring it to 110. It gives it an extra Thunderous Charge on those 3 attacks and Speed 8. Meh.
Why?
Take a Warlock for 25 points more.
Yeah.
These used to be great because Warlocks didn't inspire everything. I don't know. It seems like a really expensive inspiring source now that doesn't really help in combat all that much.
Yeah. Like, when you could potentially start to write an argument, put him on a chariot and use him as chaff, 100-point chaff.
Ugh. 3 attacks, defense. No. What's the point? You just,
Yeah, clearly an internal balance problem. Yeah.
I don't think we need to waste any more time on the poor Army Standard.
No.
Sorry, fella.
No, it's the Warlock's fault.
Berserker Bully, one of the premium hero choices, is Large Infantry, Speed 6, Melee 3, Range, Dash, Defense 4, Unit Strength 1, 8 attacks, Dash 14, 130 points, gets Brutal Crushing Strength 2, inspires everything, is nimble, and also gets Wild Charge D3. All I have to do is say 8 attacks with Melee 3, with Dash 14 for 130 points.
Crushing 2.
Crushing 2. Ooh, fantastic. These guys here are hard to take down in one turn. Like, you've got to really dedicate to killing it off, because if you don't, that 8 attacks comes back and converts extremely well, and you do not want to get these guys in your flank, because it's like a cav unit hitting you. So
I'm kind of glad they can't, but it is a shame for ogre players that they can't ride like a giant ogre goat or something.
An ogre goat.
You know, some sort of mount to be
goater.
just that little bit scarier with the extra range.
Berserker Goat Bully.
Like an aggro ram. I think it's dwarves that ride goats, isn't it?
Badgers, yeah.
They ride
Maybe they
badgers. Ogres would ride rhinos, that's what I reckon.
Rhino, yeah. Give it a rhino, that'd be nasty. Anyway, yeah, he's good.
Extra speed or extra wild charge is always good. Otherwise, I'd probably keep him cheap and cheerful. Blade of slashing, maybe.
Yeah, Blade of Slashing's handy, as is the Mace of Crushing, just to help convert that extra 1 attack. With Crush 2, both of those, and Melee 3, both of those 2 items are gold on this unit, and that doesn't make it extremely expensive at 135.
Yeah, very nice little package for the value. Plus, he can claim like every other. He can claim and threaten flanks. Like, him in the flank is like dragon level scary. Like, you can't let him have a flank, and he's just this cheap idiot running around on foot. Man, ogre characters are so ridiculously good. Ogre Warlord is our next one in the list. No doubt he will be overcosted and crappy, or maybe he'll be bent like all the other ogre characters. So this guy has Speed 6, Melee 3, Range Dash, and Defense 5. Unit Strength 1, 7 attacks, 15, 17 nerve on a dude, 155 points. He is Brutal, Crush 2, Inspiring, and Nimble. He can exchange his shield with a 2-handed weapon, so goes to Defense 4 and Crush 3 for 0 points. He can have a crocodile. He can be on a chariot. Yeah, and that's about it, I guess.
Yep.
Interesting.
Putting him on a chariot sort of turns him into a light dragon.
Yeah, I guess so. Putting him on a chariot definitely makes him similar to a dragon, I guess. 185 points. Like, he packs a punch, but he's got Thunderous 1 and Crush 2. probably wouldn't swap him down to defense 4. Would you guys do that?
No, there's no point.
No.
Just stay with Crush 2 and defense 5, which is good enough. And he's just so hard to remove. 15, 17 and defense 5 for those points is just 155 points. That's just much tougher than like a regiment would be around that same cost. Sure, he's only unit strength 1, but he's putting out quite reliable damage. He's just like, he's better than any regiments I have in any of my armies for an equivalent level points, both in terms of damage output and survivability. Plus he's on a tiny little base to do it all with, and he inspires. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've played against the Ogre Warlord a few times, but every time I get on a chariot, really good at doing exactly what you just said. Charging past the front line to pin down a unit. And then letting your big hordes do all the fighting, but he just hangs around. He's so hard to take off. So
that's it. You charge into him, expose things, flanks or whatever, but then he'll just keep surviving and keep hitting over the course of the game. That unit's depressingly good. I guess we should move right on ahead then to the bigot. This is a Bensome unit.
This is the reason why you don't take the army standard. So speed 5, melee 4, range nothing, defense 4, no unit strength, 3 attacks, 9, 11 nerve, 55 points, crush 1, individual, inspiring, or you can put him on a flea bag with 25 points, or just give him a short bow to drop the crushing strength, but give him a ranged 4 attack, or 3 ranged 4 attacks. For 55 point inspiring, why take the army standard? It's the cheapest that you've got if you need inspiring. There's a bit of a difference in terms of point price between the Warlock and the Bigot, that it may be viable, because that's 40 extra points, so that's not a small amount. If you need something, this is your go-to, I guess.
Also, I guess for 80 points, and this is already feels like a bit of a stretch as I say it when you compare to some of those other units, but putting him on the flea bag gives you very fast inspiring, so you can keep up with those. If you've got an army that has a few chariot units in it or something like that the waddling ogres can't quite keep up with, you might.
Why is it a red goblin able to inspire big ogres? That's
maybe they got a
ridiculous.
really cool looking flag.
Maybe.
Like a picture of an ogre head or something. It's like, oh yeah, that looks real good.
It's flying the colours of the regiment or whatever, I guess. Doesn't matter who's holding it.
That'd be a really tall flag as well. Yeah. Anyway, let's move on.
All right. So Kuzlo and Madfall. So speed 8, melee 3, no range, defense 4, unit strength 1 with 5 attacks, 13, 15 nerve for 145 points. Is height 3 on a large cav base. And special rules, crossing strength 2, has inspiring but only for himself. And nimble, pathfinder, ravenous lizard. And regeneration 4+, has the sticky tongue rule and vicious in melee. Comes with 2 bolted on spells, enthrall 5 and hex 3. With the goblin special keyword there. Bensome, you've used this guy a fair bit. Keen on your thoughts?
Yeah, he's one of my favourites. He's pretty nifty. It's a bit of a weird spot within the ogres, meaning it adds the extra speed for your movable unit strength. The enthrall, the sticky tongue, is a bit of a gimmick. Sometimes it does okay, usually it doesn't, but the hex is quite reliable. One thing that works really well with this list, though, is the Ravenous Lizard. So that's the neg1 to their Waver and Rout values, and it does stack with Brutal, because it's not Dread, which doesn't. So having that basically neg2 Brutal, if you have a Mammoth nearby as well, that's neg3 to everyone. But it also affects yourself, but if you smash and face, it doesn't really matter that much, does it?
No.
Yeah, that's juicy.
Still 145 points for, just get a Berserker Bully.
It's very fast. It can get into flanks, and it can use enthrall to get people out of position, I guess. Certainly, if you can also use enthrall to mitigate the ogre's movement 6 issues a little bit. So if you have, 3 hordes of meathead ogres that are just moving up, you might be able to pull people straight towards you with enthrall.
But the issue is that happens after the charging.
Yeah.
Yeah, I realise that. So, but you put your opponent in a position where maybe they can't just continue to trundle back and threaten. They have to either commit and go in or not, which I feel like you could find a pretty good use for that if you were clever.
Yeah, I think the enthrall, pulling units into terrain so that if they did charge, they're hindered to help out your defense 6 is probably the best way to use these guys, to use enthrall.
But you also have to factor in that the enthrall is not the usual length. It's only 12 inches because it's part of the sticky tongue rule.
True.
So he has to get quite close to do it.
Although Bensome used it on me once where I had a horde of tunnel runners and they were right next to a building. So the building's on their right flank, right? And then he just squeezed them over about an inch so that now the building was just right in their corner so they couldn't get past it. It's actually incredibly awkward when you're in that spot in Kings of War. You can't move through the building, and I was I have to spend my turn moving sideways now to get around this building.
Yeah.
There are little uses for it. It's one of those things that's very hard to quantify on paper, I think, but you can find uses for it. And that could be a game-winning play, doing something like that.
Yeah, stopping an objective or something similar.
Yep. Or bring in a unit into a forest.
I think Kuzlo and Madfor are a lot harder to quantify value-wise as compared to a Berserker Bully, which is just going to do what it says on the tin pretty much every game. But every now and again, it's going to really kick ass. So I think if you want to put a bit of flavour into your ogre list, which I feel like I'm starting to become an advocate for as we read through this instead of just taking all the obvious options, then give him a whirl. I think you might be impressed. It's pretty quick and tricksy. Okay. Grockamok is a big meathead of an ogre with a big old meathead ogre club. So he's a speed 6, melee 3, defense 5 guy. 7 attacks, 15-17 nerve, 250 points. So this sounds almost exactly the same as the ogre leader. What's he called? The ogre
Warlord.
Head honcho?
Yep.
Warlord, thank you. So identical stats, I think. Blast D3, though, is his main thing. Brutal, crush 3 rather than 2. So he's got the big old crush 3. Nimble and very inspiring. So this is your Ogre Warlord plus a bit more. So for a mere 95 points, you can have an extra crush and blast D3. So he's going to absolutely explode units unless you fluff your roll to hit, which you probably will just because of how his potential is damage output,
if you
right?
need it
You're going to go in and hit 3 out of 7 attacks instead of 6 out of 7, if you really need it to go off. But yeah, he's for 95 points, you turn your Warlord into a unit that can just solo hordes. But I still don't know that it's necessarily worth it. But if you want the biggest, baddest ogre going around with the biggest, baddest Thunder Mace club kind of thing, then rock and roll, why not?
Yeah. So this used to be taken a lot, but he's sort of fallen out of vogue once again because the other options are just probably more efficient for the points.
You don't need inspiring.
And my God, do I hate coming up against him because you've got to deal with all these giant big hordes, and then there's this 40 mil base hanging around that is able to solo regiments. So yeah, he's nasty dude. I consider taking him just for that sort of fluff and flavour.
I probably prefer the Warlord point for point, but can definitely see the strength of this guy because he's just an incredible threat on such a small base. It's so hard to deal with.
Yep.
All right, let's move on to the other unique hero. He should be called Nomagarok +1, so you always take him, just about. This is another spellcaster. Spellcaster 2, if that matters anything. Speed 6, melee 4, range nothing, defense 5. Unit strength 1, 5 attacks instead of the 2 over the Warlock. 12-14 nerve at 140 points. He has Brutal, Crushing Strength 1, Inspiring Nimble, the Ogre Warlock rule, and his own special Bloodlust. which basically means if his heal goes off, then that unit that got healed now has Vicious in combat. Spells built in is Bane Chant 3, Heal 4, Lightning Bolt 4. So he's got Lightning Bolt 5 to 7 because of the Ogre Warlock rule. Same with his heal. Yeah, for 140 points is so good. And he inspires, of course.
Yeah, he's an auto include. Let's be honest.
Yeah. Warlock is probably the best value for point unit in the Ogre roster, just about. And then this guy's just a better version of that.
Mm-hmm.
So the only reason you don't take him is because you have some sort of fluff dispute with it or something. Like they mucked up with this guy. He's as you read him, especially when you get to compare him against the regular pleb, other heroes from non-ogre armies. When you read through the book with Namagarok in it, and you're just like, this guy, like, did they just forget a digit on his points? Like he's just like, did they just drop their calculator or something?
I guess for our listeners though, why is he so good? Is probably and why is he an auto include? It's because of all the other units that he can sit behind. So we'll go back to the Siege Breakers. Once again, they're crushing 2, 18 attacks, hitting on 3, so really, really strong and hard to move because the defense 6 in the front. And now this guy comes in, can get up to heal 7 easily, so heals your defense 6 units. But while he's doing that, he also gives them Vicious with their crushing 2. So now this super killy unit is now super killy, and they've just got their wounds back.
All caps.
For 140 points while inspiring them. It's just this beautiful symmetry for 140 points.
Yeah, you'd pay 30, 40 points more happily. So that is so much in Kings of War. Like, so many units in Kings of War are great, but would be mediocre for like 10 more points. Like, it's such a tightly pointed game, and this guy is a really, like, it's. I know we've talked about some of the other things being quote unquote broken, and I like to be a bit hyperbolic about it sometimes. But this guy is vastly undercosted. Like, he was a straight up mistake. This guy. So if he's not in your Ogre Army at the moment, you just get him in while you can, because he will sooner or later, presumably, someone will notice, and he will be nerfed.
Win your games with him now, quickly.
Yeah, that's my assumption.
All right, we've got one more thing to go through, and that's the formation.
All right, their formation that they get is Hell on Wheels. So this formation is built up of 1 Warlord on a chariot and 2 Ogre Chariot regiments. So that comes in for the Warlord. It's actually costed it an extra 15 points, and the Ogre Chariot regiments at +5. And what this does is gives the Warlord on the chariot rallying 1 to chariots only, and each unit in that formation gets Rampage D3, so it gives them an extra D3 attacks to all infantry and cav models. What do we think? It's pretty cheap.
I think it's reasonable.
I think it's solid. Yeah. I think 15 points is a bit much for rallying 1 chariot only. But 5 points for Rampage D3 is well worth it. Yeah, and the Warlord on Chariot ends up at 200 points base, which is quite a lot. Yeah, so you're getting close to that Horde territory.
And that's without giving additional items as well.
Without any items, yeah. So 640 points, that formation is just out of the gate. It is lots.
It's okay.
But it is also cool.
Yeah, I think if you wanted to make a themed fast Ogre Army, I think it's pretty cool. Yeah, it's probably something I'd take, to be honest. Just I like that extra speed. But
I don't mind it. I think if you're taking most of those units already, it fits well as a formation in that it's not like it doesn't change the unit so much that you're like, well, if I take chariots at all, I have to take this formation. I don't feel that way. But if I've already got an Ogre Warlord on a chariot and I've already got a regiment of chariots, I'd definitely be tempted to go ahead and grab the formation to give them that extra bit of, like, make it into more of a theme. Why not?
Yeah, why not?
All right, so what we'll do is we'll take one more break, and when we come back, we will go over army lists. All right, back soon.
Many goblins are attracted to the wealth and power of ogre mercenary armies. They become camp followers and attend to all the most menial of tasks in an ogre encampment. Occasionally, hordes of these creatures are marched to war, their natural stealth and strength in numbers complementing the ogres well. Goblins are regularly pressed into service by ogre sergeants who mark them with red clothing or war paint as a sign of ownership. The so-called red goblins wear this color with pride and an uncharacteristic loyalty to their masters. While small creatures are still too cowardly for combat, the fear of their hulking masters is greater than their fear of the enemy. Red goblin bigots lead their rabble into battle on behalf of their ogre masters. They think they are in charge. In reality, they wield no more power than the other goblins.
Okay, and let's get into the example army lists now that we've gone through the entire army list. That's shit. Alright, let's get into the army lists. Alright, so I'll start off with my example ogre list. I have gone for a 2,000 point limit, and I'm starting off with a horde of boomers because they're great. And then we've gone through to the Berserker Braves. I like my regiment, so I got 2 of them and 1 horde of Berserker Braves. None of these guys have items. I've had a regiment of Siege Breakers. Why a regiment?
Ooh.
Because they're just a shield for my 2 Crocodile Wranglers. Make sure that if you're taking these, to put them off center, so if you triple charge using Siege Breakers and Crocodile Wranglers, they can all fit, because you can't cross the streams with the leader points, so they have to be to the either side of the Siege Breakers. Keep that in mind.
Never cross the streams.
And then I've got an Ogre Warlock with Drain Life 5 to keep all those friends happy, and a Magarok. He's there for the Berserker Brave caddy, so if I can get a heal on those hordes, then that horde is vicious with the 30 attacks. I think that's pretty juicy. And I've taken the formation. They're just naked, no items, but having that extra speed with the Warlord and then the 2 Ogre Chariots. My thinking there is the Chariot regiments are like faster warrior hordes. It's only slightly larger in terms of the footprint, but it gives them speed 8 instead of speed 6. And with the rally, it gives them better nerve. So I think that is a pretty comparable buff, I guess, is how I would think of it. And with the extra rampage as well, it sort of makes up for the slight dip in amount of attacks that the warrior regiment gets over from the warrior chariot regiment over the warrior horde. So it's basically making them really fast.
Yeah, I like that.
I like it.
It's a bit different as well.
But that's my thinking. That's my list. A little bit of shooting with the lightning, some good solid core, 2 Crocodile Wranglers for the wins, and the Chariots for some speed.
Yeah, the Crocodile Wrangler with the Siegebreaker regiment, plus the speed of the formation, I could see that synergizing quite well.
Yeah, and because they sort of speed 6, like even if the Breakers is run up forward and you've got Crocodile Wranglers right behind, they can zip out the next turn pretty easily and harass. Yeah, I like this list the more I look at it.
Alrighty.
Yeah, it's cool one now.
What are you bringing? So,
I'm bringing 2,000 points as well.
yeah.
When I went through this, my first sort of thoughts was that it's quite easy to build the list. There's not many bad options, similar to undead lists, right? But I went through and picked things that I hate facing against, pretty much. So, I've gone 5 hordes of Siege Breakers. No, just kidding. So I've gone with a horde of Boomers with Fire Oil. I really like them.
Yep.
I love their defensive nature. 2 regiments of Vanilla Warriors. Brew of Haste on Hunter Horde with a Crocodile, just because I had 5 points left over. I really like that speed 8 on those guys coming out of the woods. I think is a really good combination. Then I've gone for Berserker Braves, just in a regiment vanilla, or as some thick chaff. 2 hordes of Siege Breakers, one with Staying Stone, one with Fury. just as a rock hard centre. Crocodile Wrangler there just to help them out through the middle there, just as more of a defensive chaffy unit. The Ogre Warlock with Conjurer's Staff with Drain Life 5 for obvious reasons. 2 Berserker Bullies, both vanilla as well, just for the late game, chipping away some extra wounds as well as objective play, and my auto include there with Nomagorok.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it'd be quite a hard list to play against, but hopefully with the Hunters and Boomers and things like that, it's a little bit out of the norm, but still pretty tough. 22 unit strength on that. There's only 12 drops though at 2k, so it's quite elite.
Well, mine's only
that
19
sounds really
unit
good,
strength with 12 drops.
Okay.
Interesting. Okay, so I went for something a bit different because I wanted to try something a little bit different to you guys, because I know you'd take the conventional stuff. Now, before I actually go into the list, I know Sellick was joking about it before, but you could quite easily just go 5 hordes of siege breakers. God, it hurts. It pains me just to say it. It's like blood in my mouth. But 5 crocodile wranglers, 4 warlocks, and Nomagorok. Like, that list is just broken, and it's so boring and dull. But like, I feel like people could go for it anyway. Speaking of hopefully not so boring and dull units, we'll see how we go. So I set myself a little challenge. I thought, I'm not taking anything bigger than regiment.
Okay.
So I'm trying for like an
MSU.
MSU style ogre list. Problem is, pretty much the only regiments that unlock are warrior regiments and also chariots. So I've got 1 unit of chariots,
Braves?
1 regiment
Braves do.
with the boots, of course, for 230 points. I've got 2 regiments of boomers to turn around and blow up anything that flies into my rear. I've got 5 regiments of warriors, which is too much copy-paste for my liking. I'd much rather that be 2 or 3 regiments of warriors, like one of the hunters and one of the braves or something. That's what I originally had, but I had to convert to warriors because they're the only ones that unlock. Then 2 crocodile wranglers, a mammoth with the big deal, and then an ogre warlock, Nomagorok, and the warlord. So the warlord has the blade of slashing and the warlock has the boomstick. Other than that, I have no magic items. So it's got 1 reach out and touch unit with the chariots, not that much, to be fair. It's got a whole heap of lightning bolt and a bit of fireball if anyone stands behind me, sort of fireball in this form of the boomers and stuff. But mostly it's just a heap of regiments and little annoying units. So I've got unit strength 20 and 14 drops. So a little bit more unit strength and drops than you guys, but obviously a lot less like single individual units that can go into something and take it off. Like, it's pretty low on the like impact level for an ogre list, I think.
And that's 2,000 points, yeah?
2,000, yeah. But if you combine like a warrior regiment with a crocodile and a mammoth or something, like you can take things off, but it's a lot more like chip away at range. And I mean, the most expensive unit in the army is the chariots for 230 with the striding. So I feel like you want them to hit in an impactful way on a flank or something. But you've got 7 regiments of ogres to try to, wrangle that as best you can, and a bunch of other little crappy things. So I think it's trying to pick its charges as best it can and really leverage those warlocks to do as much damage as possible, because you're going to have max lightning bolt at all times.
Yeah, it could work. Like, as long as you're focus fire early, so that when you do finally combo charge a unit with your regiments, that you can just take it off. Like, everything's suitably weakened.
Yeah, I feel like the shooting is more like just to remove chaff, but I feel like it removes that chaff really reliably, and then it tries to just have more drops and more... Like, everything's expendable, right? Those warrior regiments, 5 of them, it's going to take a long time to chew through them, but they're only 120 points each. So you can throw them in and they can die. Same with the boomers and stuff. It's going to play like a ratkin list because you're throwing units away and you're doing chip damage, and it's not really going to play like an ogre unit. And I wanted to just build something a bit different, I guess. It's a silly list, but whatever. Yeah, so there's our 3 different lists. They're all pretty cool in their own way. I wish that, I feel like if I actually played ogres, I'd probably try to take a couple of different hordes and then unlock all the cool stuff and take all the cool stuff. But to be honest, I actually feel like the internal balance of this list is not very good. It's funny that you said, so like it's so easy to build a list because like you just take anything, but the top half of the list you just don't take.
Yep.
And even a lot of those characters that are all really good in their own right, like in almost any other army, those characters would be some of the best ones, even the ones that you don't take. But because the internal balance in the characters is a bit off too, it's like Warlord, Warlord, Warlock, and Berserker Bully all stand out as just extremely powerful options. You're not really going to... And of course, Nomagorok.
Yep.
It's going to be hard to fit any of those others in. And, the Siege Breakers are kind of better than all the other ogre units, but some combination of warriors, hunters, braves, and Siege Breakers is going to be your army in virtually every single ogre army. And then how do you fit in, when you put in all those extremely well-costed characters, how do you fit in your giant and your mammoth and your cool stuff, your gobos and whatever else?
Yeah, the simple answer is you don't.
Too right.
Agreed. Well, there you have it. 3 lists to copy and paste in your next tournament. Let us know what you think, and if you are able to successfully use Boomer Chariots, maybe. Let us know. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Not all ogres return home. Sadly, there are fatalities. Some ogres never feel the mating urge and remain in the south all their days. The Basileans have perfected a means of ensuring this. Others return home, but once their children are sired, they yearn for war and plunder, taking up their swords again. Ogre warlords are the mightiest of these war-loving veterans. They alone of the ogres venture from the south to the north and back, over and over, attending the great things every few years to entice a new generation of ogre braves into life of warfare in exotic lands. Warlords are usually bigger and stronger than the other ogres, and all are expert fighters. A rare few display a gift for tactics and strategy, and rise to a high rank in the militaries of other nations. For these expatriate ogres, the ways of the southern peoples are too fascinating or just too comfortable to abandon. For other ogres, these warlords hold a strange mix of fascination and repulsion. That they are mighty and rich is beyond doubt, but what right-minded ogre would exchange a comfortably drafty cave for silk bedsheets in a room with a door?
Thank you for tuning in with my team. Make sure you follow on Facebook and Twitter. Yes, indeed, more than a game, it's a lifestyle. Yes, sir. Hope you realize that the math hammer doesn't work. We give the people what they desire. Australian War Gaming Podcast, direct Misfire. You don't want to miss a thing. Yeah, we got plenty more. If you're ready, let's go. Stay tuned, that's for sure. Hey.